Okay, so Rachel, help me understand your decision to leave the firm as, right, a 3 year associate from Harvard. So it's not like you have a huge 401k and you're going to be really comfortable after this. This was a big decision. Help me understand why you decided to leave.
Absolutely. If people follow both of us on TikTok or if they've seen me before, they probably know that it was unlikely that I was on a long-term career trajectory at a large corporate law firm. And that was a comment that I used to get all the time on my kind of political posts around what are you doing at this place? And so while I don't have a huge 401k, and I'm so sorry, my apartment's like on an alley, so you may hear that in the background, but while I don't have a huge 401k or anything similar at this point, I was not anticipating to be in this kind of income bracket for the rest of my life, and I was planning financially accordingly. So it certainly still wasn't an easy decision, but something that I tell people when they're considering whether or not they can sleep at night going into an industry like this one, having the politics that I and many of my followers and many of your followers hold, is that is a value compromise for sure. I think about this post that Rain Fisher Kwan put up ages ago around how saying there's no ethical consumption under capitalism doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want. It means where are my lines, knowing that that's true. And so going into this industry is a values compromise, but the only thing that makes you give up your values is giving up your values. So when I hit a point, even before today, but over the past, where today, Thursday, where in the past I've had kind of inflection points where I'm like, oh, I can use all of this access and authority to advance my political aims in a way that only somebody who's progressive or on the left in this space could do. I have to use that. And that was kind of how I felt in that moment because I think a lot about like proactivity and reactivity and how the left is so reactive a lot of the time. And what I felt like I was seeing was obvious precursors to my firm going the way of Paul Weiss and just caving to the administration. And I realized if I was as confident that that's what we were going to do as I was, then the only right thing to do was to intervene before it happened, you know?
Right. Yeah. It's one thing to look at all of maybe the clients that SCAD has, right? And say, are these big private equity funds always good actors in the economy? No. Are they on the same team as Trump, especially when he's with all these billionaires and Elon Musk? Maybe, but it feels like something entirely different when the step is taken that the executive branch has a direct line to the biggest corporate law firms and they're exchanging favors while he's the president. Was that the main motivating force in your organizing and other people, around our age at this firm and other big corporate law firms?
Absolutely. And I think you nailed it because it's a comment I'm getting sometimes by people that I think really misunderstand the way that the system works. And I don't mean that to say that they're not right, to point out that a lot of these corporate actors are often aligned with the administration. But this isn't actually about that at all. The previous discussion is, this kind of frame of something that a lot of people that were opposed to people going into big corporate law firms was everybody deserves a lawyer, but it doesn't have to be you. And that's true and a very fair critique. But what we're getting at is that the president is saying not everybody deserves a lawyer and we're listening. That's a totally different ball game than engaging in representations for clients that I may not always morally be aligned or politically be aligned with. And that is the nature of representation in this country. Even public defenders, right, aren't always aligned with everyone that they represent, though that's certainly a more moral path of defending people that you might disagree with. And so I think that the movement here was pretty easy to build, frankly, because it's not political. It's like an existential threat to the entirety of the legal system. And he's targeting these large corporate law firms first because I think he's correctly identifying that they both have perhaps some of the most influence in the legal spaces in the country. Like, look how quickly a third-year associate's farewell email got picked up by national news, and also just how deeply systems trusting and risk averse they are and unwilling they or unable they are to think outside of the box and recognize what's happening, which is, I mean, straight up an ongoing authoritarian takeover of the United States.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. I always quote, it's commonly attributed to Benito Mussolini. Now, if you search it on Google, it says that it's not, and there's a question of that. But I think it's a good definition, nevertheless, that fascism would more accurately be called corporatism because it's the merging together of the corporation and the state. And corporate law firms and our legal infrastructure have a ton of power. What would it mean if Trump, which it sounds like he is, was directly working with the largest corporate law firms in America? What is having that legal control? What kind of power would that translate to for regular people in America? How would it impact their lives?
Such a good question. I, I can't overstate how bad most of the attorneys that are willing to work for Trump outright are. Like they're just not very good at being attorneys. And so I think that something that's really being missed in a lot of this discourse, and that I really can't go on PBS and say, is that his lawyers are shitty. And he's getting some of the best lawyers in the country for free to support his aims. So all of the stuff that Trump wants to do, and I'm sure that y'all are following like the way that he's targeting judges or the way that he's targeting and trying to intimidate public interest lawyers. And he's also targeting loan forgiveness programs that a lot of public interest lawyers use. There's all of these things that are happening. But something that can't be overstated is the import of having really good attorneys owe Donald Trump millions of dollars in legal services so that he drops an executive order that was already illegal. It's just insane. And I shouldn't overstate that because I'm sure that someone will come in and say, maybe it's not illegal, but I can tell you that a district court judge has issued a temporary restraining order in the enforcement of the Perkins order, which came out right before the Paul Weiss one and tracks it very, very closely. And
Yeah.
so it's just it a judge is not going to uphold the enforcement of these in this current moment. So rolling over and capitulating not only provides him with all of these legal services, but it also then kind of there was a path that Perkins Coie, the first firm that had this executive order launched against it, was following of fighting the Trump administration really effectively. And so we now have this other corporate law firm that's setting out this alternate path that is very, very scary because even if the courts work and even if Trump listens to judges, and those are two pretty big ifs in this scenario, one of which I think we've seen Trump's already kind of not listening to judges and trying to get Fox News to explain why that's, normal when it absolutely isn't. Even if this is working and the judiciary is working kind of separately, if you don't have lawyers to bring these cases, it doesn't matter. We don't have like a sua sponte justice system. Someone has to bring the case.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's almost like after the first Trump administration, everyone was like, well, at least he's not that capable and the people around him aren't that talented. And now we're
Mm-hmm.
kind of in that moment where it's like, that could happen. And what do
Mm-hmm.
we do when that happens? You sent this sort of, it's not necessarily a resignation letter, but sort of an ultimatum you gave to the firm, um, to the entire firm. What has the reaction been among maybe some of these people who are going to represent Trump? Have they said anything to you or posted publicly about this situation?
So I have gotten so much support from people that work at the firm on the side and personal emails, etc. We're not seeing a lot of people speak publicly, but I think it's important to name that when they ask me if I think that they should, I usually say no. Like, unless you're at Paul Weiss, I don't know the utility in everybody who's willing. It takes a really high risk tolerance to send that email. It also is only really worth it if you have somebody who's pretty media comfortable and willing to like do the follow-up and continue to promote and keep the public eye. That's the only way. This throws sand in the gears a little bit. But if it was just a one email and then I wasn't comfortable talking to people, it would throw sand in the gears for like 30 seconds. And so it's just not everybody's situated the same way. There's the racial, the financial, the Harvard privilege of it all, right? I'm getting that kind of outreach and I'm encouraging associates to engage we would we had been doing so much organizing on this, like so much organizing before it got to this point. This is one step in a very long game, or one move, I guess, in a very long game, if not to mix metaphors. But I will say there's been no like leadership response, except that I got a message from a friend today that they removed the ability to send firm-wide emails without pre-approval.
That's one clear policy change. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's almost like all of the young associates that are organizing behind this. I mean, it sounds like it's mostly young associates. Is that
Oh yeah.
right? That are
Mhm.
organizing at these firms. I mean, how will they convert a Word document to a PDF without you guys, you know? It's not going to be good. So,
No.
you have a big bargaining chip there when you ask them these things. But what's the existing organizing like? There's like a sort of letter that's going around that people are signing on to. Can you explain that?
Sure. We read this Perkins Coie executive order. I have some group texts that came out on the 6th of March. The letter was largely a response to that, and I'll just walk you through the timeline really quickly and kind of what our organizing thought process was. Perkins Coie comes out the 6th of March. I read it, a couple of friends read it who had sent it to me. We're all like, oh my God, this is really, really bad. It's clearly telegraphing that the Trump administration is punishing firms for past representation, trying to scare them out of future representation, whatever else. Then the next day, and it's not necessarily being covered altogether, but I think it should be, the next day he issues an executive order related to public service loan forgiveness, which outlines that he doesn't think that people should be eligible for public service loan forgiveness if they work at an organization previously deemed like a public service organization that engages in, quote, I think it's substantially illegal activities, end quote, something like that. And he lists what he thinks those things are. So it's like immigration representation. It is helping people cross state lines to get gender affirming care. He refers to that as human trafficking. It is helping people who engage in like blocking highways. So very obvious kind of free speech stuff here. And so those two together, my friends and I were like, this clearly goes together. He's outlining what type of legal representation he doesn't want people to take. And I will say, I've noticed they've been so quiet on abortion, like so quiet on abortion in these things. And I think that it's because he saw the reaction to Dobbs. Maybe not, I shouldn't say Trump. Whoever is pulling the strings saw the reaction to Dobbs, realized how massively unpopular it was, and that it was way more popular to scapegoat migrants and trans people. And so is not including abortion in the write-ups, but it's in there. And so we saw these things. We start emailing. I reached out because I think that the notion of going about doing things in like the quote unquote right way is often used for like racial tone policing. I think that sometimes it is fair to say, did you try these other avenues before you did XYZ? And so the letter was a plan B. We draft this open letter that in the background, we're trying to get people to sign on to anonymously because I've tried some big law organizing before and people will not put their names on things. And so we have this running, but also I and many other people are kind of trying to work within our firms to not have to even get to the open letter level. And we're not really getting satisfactory responses. And so we launch this open letter and it starts getting a little bit of coverage in like legal publications and similar. And then it's building. And then my firm and 19 other firms got what's called an EEOC demand letter, which is the government asking for a bunch of information about the people that work at these firms in a way that's clearly targeted at intimidating people of color that work within them. And so now my firm's kind of pulled into it, as are these 19 others, and you don't have to comply with an EEOC demand letter. So then the organizing on a firm level really shifts to at each of these 20 firms, why haven't you confirmed we're not complying with this? Why are you leaving open the question of if you're going to turn over? It was asking for names, email addresses, phone numbers of all of these employees. What are you doing? And so then the Paul Weiss like deal broke. And I realized that the answers or the non-answers that they were giving, again, not just at my former firm, but at all the firms where I had any insight, had to have been like the exact same answers that Paul Weiss associates were getting until they read about the deal in the New York Times, you know?
Yeah. What sort of like threat or leverage does Trump have to make you comply as a law firm? Is that a factor here?
I think that people are worried about clients dropping them if it seems like we don't have access to the government.
Interesting.
Um, right? Like there's certain enforcement mechanisms under the Civil Rights Act and Title VII and all of this stuff that if Trump gets the law where he wants it, which I think is totally within the realm of possibility, unfortunately. Like the affirmative action case, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard. Um, if the reasoning there is extended at the Supreme Court to private industry, he has a lot of enforcement mechanisms under Title VII, which is just like a horrific bastardization of what any of those titles were for, but that's a conversation for another day. I think what's really scary here is that he has the legal pathways to make this happen. You know, he could go about this in a legal way. He might even win the Perkins litigation in the long run if he focuses on the DEI elements of everything and manages to get the court to rule the way that I assume it would if this question goes up to it. But I think the capitulation before that even happens, as opposed to being like, whoa, we need to run interference here because the writing's on the wall, is really, really, really troubling. And I think that all that he has on that is telegraphing to people that they aren't in his good graces and then being scared that clients will leave.
Is one of the motivating factors for Trump? You named a few things. It sounds like DEI and immigration are the first sort of issue areas they're focusing on. But I mean, is deregulation a big part of what he wants these firms help with?
You know, honestly, I hadn't even thought of that, and I should add it to my list. I'm focused on because he has telegraphed plenty of stuff on that too, right? And there have been some really bad cases related to the administrative state um, that are troubling.
Yeah. What's next for you? What do you do after something like this?
I mean, I think that question would have been, I wasn't really expecting this.
Yeah.
Um, and I didn't need this in order for it to feel like it was worth it to draw attention here. And to kind of raise the heat a little because there's that sweet spot, you know, where you're not in stasis, but you're also not too stressed where you can actually get some change done. And so we're just like gradually raising the heat until the firms do some shit. But I didn't, to be told, to be totally honest, I was so stressed and anxious when I sent that email. A couple of my friends live up the street and they brought over a Costco bottle of wine. And I had several glasses because I was up until 3 in the morning trying to stay off of my phone. They stayed over and were kind of trying to distract me. And I woke up the next morning at 7:30 with like a Costco wine headache and a journalist at PBS asking if I could come on NewsHour that afternoon. I didn't think it was going to be that. I wouldn't have had the third glass of wine if I had thought that was what was going to happen. And so I don't know because I don't know what's going to happen this week with organizing efforts. I don't know what's going to happen in terms of the country. I just know that this is a moment where I have the potential to tell a lot of people about really bad stuff that I think that we collectively can work on that I don't think that they knew until very recently. And I'm gonna use that as long and as best as I can.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important. Where can people follow your work?
I think that the most obvious breakdowns and most in-depth are usually on TikTok, which is at Cohen489. And then I also have some Canva and stuff on Instagram, which is at Cohen.489. I should have standardized it a long time ago. And I am trying to get into Blue Sky. I'm dipping my toes in. Everything is Cohen489, like the number 489, either with a dot or without. So
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rachel, for talking about all of this.
thanks so much.
All right.